This is part 3 of a 4-part project. If you want to start from the beginning, now is your chance. Otherwise, just stick around and enjoy the ride. Say what you want about my taste of Game Boy ports, but you can't say that Croc 2 is a lackluster Game Boy Color game. Sure, the GBC doesn't hold a candle to the power of a PlayStation, and of course there are flaws here and there, like the really small screen. But honestly, I prefer it this way. The 2D sprites just work for me. Now that I've got my massive preference for 2D out of the way, let's talk about the game itself. In the beginning of the game, young Croc comes across a letter in a bottle sent from his mom, which leads to the main plot of the game. Upon your arrival to a new island, Croc here has a decent variety of moves to show off. He can run, ground pound, do a spin attack, do a devastating dash jump, and even pick up and throw barrels in a given situation. Now that is one gifted crocodile. Throughout 4 towns, there are 3 missions and a boss fight, a total of 6 areas to go about. There's even a shop where you can buy items to improve yourself or to reach areas that are inaccessible by standard means. While the enemies themselves aren't that hard to beat, some of the hazards, and even a couple of bosses, will spell the end to you in bold letters if you don't think things through. If there was one big flaw I could point out, it's that the completionist route isn't that rewarding considering all the efforts you have to go through. Other than that, it's a great game to play and great to experience. It's a childhood favorite of mine like no other. Well, back to square one yet again. Game & Watch Gallery 3. Now, I have to say that this one is probably the weakest in terms of selection. There are a lot of games that don't have a modern version, and some of the unlockable games just aren't up to par, but the games that it does have are among the best in Game & Watch history. Let's start with Egg. In the classic mode, you have to use your powers of judgment to know which egg will fall first. It is arguably one of the hardest games in the entire library. Next, Greenhouse. Both versions are incredibly hectic and requires full attention at all times. Pay attention. One misstep can bring you from safe and sound to borderline panic mode. Turtle Bridge is a bit of a puzzle. Jump on the turtles, or Goonies, and deliver those packages. Both versions are fun in their own right. Mario Brothers is perhaps the only port to actually surpass its original. For one thing, you get to play as both Mario and Luigi. Second, instead of killing turtles, you get to make some cake. And everybody loves cake. And finally, Luigi is in the zone. And then there's Donkey Kong Jr. I won't lie, but there's a massive glitch in the modern version. I already mentioned this before in the top 10 Game & Watch games, but long story short, if you want to play Donkey Kong Jr., play it on the 4th installment. Like I said, there's also unlockable games, but they aren't really worth the mention. Like I said, weakest of the 4. But you know, a good game is still a good game, no matter how you present it.
Anyone for tennis? Nice game.
I gotta give a hand to Camelot Software. If there's 3 things these guys can do right, then it's Mario sports games, RPGs, and sweet pan flute music. We'll get to the pan flute in the next countdown. But for now, let's talk about Mario Tennis for the Game Boy Color. The N64 version had all those Mario characters to play as, but the Game Boy Color went for a more experimental approach. You see, you aren't playing as Mario here. Instead, you either get to play as Alex, the male protagonist, or Nina, the female protagonist. Both these characters have their own special attributes and even have their own doubles partner to aid them in their doubles matches. So the playable roster is completely new. Is there anything else? How about an entire change to the core gameplay, my friends? Yes, this is still tennis we're talking about here, but now we've got RPG elements to the game as well. As you level up, you can influence your stats in a number of ways to suit your gameplay style. Need some sweet power shots? Put some points to the power stat. Gotta go fast? shoot levels to the speed stat. Adding even more to the RPG elements include equipable items to adjust said stats, and a bigger focus on story and narrative. But the best part easily comes from the end of the game. You thought you were the champion of the world, but now comes the time to take on a more familiar land to prove your skills. The question is, are you a big enough boss to take on the greatest player who ever lived? That's all up to you. Man, I really wished I had a PlayStation at some point in time. I missed out on some classics like Croc, Crash Bandicoot, and the legendary Metal Gear Solid. Yes, I hear there's some games available for Nintendo consoles, but there aren't that many, and they aren't exactly easy to get a hands-on experience. With the exception of one, Metal Gear Solid for the Game Boy Color. Metal Gear Solid for the Game Boy Color is a game with more depth than I expected at first glance. I figured it was going to take more of an arcade-style gameplay due to the limitations of a Game Boy. Boy, was I surprised. It captures some of the same stealth-based gameplay that we all know from the franchise, I think. At the start, you have virtually nothing at your arsenal, but you quickly get more equipment and weapons to aid you. Sneaking tactics are the most important above all in this game, and you get rewarded for keeping yourself away from the bad guys after every stage. Of course, there's also a few people you can talk to on your codec. There's the Colonel, back in action, Mei Ling, another returning character, Mr. McBride, an expert on the nation you're fighting in, and Chris, another agent working alongside you. Each character has their own unique backstories and uses, and by far my favorite is Weasel's. Weasel is a former agent of questionable background with a lot of expertise in war, and can aid Snake by explaining how certain weapons and gear work. He also has a really interesting backstory, mainly involving a war he fought and how he got his scar. Now with all that said, the game has a big flaw: backtracking. At points for new players, you'll get lost trying to figure out what exactly to do, and no other area says it better than Stage 8. The ventilation sections take forever, there's trapdoors everywhere, and a lot of annoying electrical floors. Especially this one. Despite that, I played the entire thing, and I loved nearly every moment it brought me. There's twists, there's turns, there's fun characters, and overall the game itself is a rather solid deal. Ever wanted to play Super Mario Bros. During a time where the NES lost relevance? Or the mid to late 90s for that matter? Well, that's where Super Mario Bros. DX comes in. When I was a kid, I had no idea how big Mario was before Smash Bros. But that didn't mean I never knew any of his games. I played Mario Land and the sequel, but neither of them really had me hooked as a kid like the Game Boy Color remake of the original. There were just so many great things going for this game. Aside from the typical standard game, there was also a challenge mode, a 2-player game, an unlockable race against the Boo, a gallery corner, a record saver, a scrapbook, and oh, the original Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2. Now this is a Mario game. A lot of modes are pretty self-explanatory, but here's quite a few things that make them interesting. You versus Boo is a typical outrun the opponent, mixed in with a few traps and an increasing difficulty. Toy Box is awesome in that you get to see various artwork, have the ability to find Yoshi for challenge mode, and snag yourself some bonus 1-ups for the main game. Challenge mode is where it's at. It gives you 3 objectives for each stage: finding 5 red coins, inspired by Mario 64 and Super Mario World, point scores, which really makes you think outside the box, and finally, locating Yoshi's egg, which can be helped by using the Toy Box game mentioned earlier. If you don't have a guide, this mode will break you. Completionists, approach with caution. I actually hear not a lot of people like this game, but the only argument I can see is the screen crunch. With multiple modes, easy save points, and achievement hunting before it was cool, Mario Bros. DX is superior to the original in every other way. But I suppose that's just the viewpoint only I can see. Wario Land strikes again. This time, it's Wario Land 3. I actually have a bit of confession to make. I don't actually like this game. The story was dumb and broke away from what the first two games established. The day-night system was unnecessary and even annoying at times, and navigation was really bad, especially when you had to backtrack to the temple to figure out your next destination. But its biggest crime by far was copy-pasting nearly everything from Wario Land 2, which I still say is a far better game. So, why does this game make it on the list and so high for on that matter? Well, for one, people would complain if I didn't put it here. And for another game, while the game annoyed me with the innovation, I do appreciate that it tried new things. In terms of gameplay, Wario plays almost the same as he did in the second installment. He moves just as fluidly, has the same moves, and is nigh invincible. Of course, getting hurt causes massive knockback and can set you back to an earlier part of the stage as punishment. The concept is creative, but like I said before, it gets annoying at times. This is also home to one of the biggest twists I've ever played in a game. The final boss, spoiler alert, Rudy the Clown, was the one pulling the strings all along. But that's not the twist. The twist is that he is the only one who can give you a game over, topped with one of the most disturbing laughs I have ever heard. I mean, wow. And that's Wario Land 3 in a nutshell. I may not like it, but hey, that doesn't mean you don't. Pokemon TCG is one of my all-time favorite games that I ever got to play. The gameplay is great. If you've ever played the card game, then you should already know how it works. But for those who don't, here's a quick rundown. In this game, you have a deck of 60 cards, and as you draw cards, you lay basic Pokemon, which pretty much acts as your means of attack and defense. Energy cards allow you the means to attack, while trainer cards can help you get certain cards, or do certain things in the playing field. Ultimately, your goal is to defeat the opponent by one of three methods. 1, by taking all the prize cards before they do. 2, by KOing all the Pokemon that opponent has put down. Or 3, if the opponent is no longer able to draw cards from the deck. The methods of playing this game are nearly endless. Each Pokemon has their own weakness and or resistance, and even their own signature abilities. Some Pokemon can paralyze or poison to annoy the opponent. Some Pokemon have high HP so they can be a complete wall, and others can do serious damage at the cost of an energy card or two. The gameplay is very balanced, and arguably even more so than Pokemon Red and Blue. Oh, shut up. This is the same exact generation. The main difference between this and the mainstream games is the non-linearity. You can challenge pretty much anyone you want, and in whatever order you choose, which only furthers the experimentation you could do with card battling. Do what you want, however you want it. Anytime, anywhere. Pokemon TCG, where you can crush the opposition your way. Oh, of course, mainstream Pokemon was gonna show up again. How could it not? The first generation proved its worth in spades, so the next logical step was to beef up the features. Incoming, Pokemon Generation 2. Generation 2 is arguably just as popular with the fans as Gen 1. That comes in part from the fact that they tied so well with each other. For instance, the story. The events of Generation 2 starts 3 years after everything that occurs in Red, Blue, and Yellow. Team Rocket is back, and they're attempting to bring back their boss. While Team Rocket was clearly the weakest link of the previous game, seeing them back in action was a great way to keep up the continuity of the franchise back then. But the best part had to have been the journey into Kanto from the previous games. You conquered your home country of Johto, and proved yourself the very best. And now it's time to get even better than that. Face the Elite Four. Face the original 8 gym leaders. And now you can go toe-to-toe with your old player character in the best final battle in the history of Pokemon. Hands down. Pokemon Gold and Silver have definitely aged a lot better than Gen 1, but honestly the remakes are just a lot better. But if you truly want to experience a classic, these 3 games are your ticket. Shantae. Just look at this game. I know this is just merely a Game Boy Color game, but I'm just in marvel at how freaking good this game looks. As you may already know, Shantae is what you would call a Metroidvania style game, being that it combines both platforming and adventuring as made popular by the two games of the same name. Shantae, however, is in a league of its own. The gameplay is phenomenal. In one Game Boy Color game, you can have your character Shantae jump, attack, use magical spells and items, learn powerful combos, and even transform into various creatures to further your progression. The controls are smooth as silk. Shantae herself is pretty responsive with fluid animations, and there's plenty of stuff to do. But if there's one thing I can truly applaud, then it's the personality. The main characters all have their own animations to easily tell their feelings on the matter. Shantae herself is a well-animated character, a main character that actually talks, and above that, has a really fun personality. And that dialogue is amazing. I haven't seen writing this tongue-in-cheek since the Rareware games. The one thing keeping it from number one was its poor sales on initial release. It was just poor timing on WayForward's account. And now, time for some honorable mentions. 102 Dalmatians, Puppies to the Rescue. This was a legitimately good game for the Game Boy Color. The premise was easy to understand, it controlled pretty well, and the password system made it really easy to jump levels. Mega Man Extreme 2 was your typical Mega Man X games, with the downgrades of less fluid animations and a smaller color palette. But that doesn't mean it doesn't play as well. All your moves return, and the challenge level is just what you'd expect from a Mega Man game. And finally, Link's Awakening DX. This one's cheating a bit because I already talked about the Game Boy version, but the DX version adds a few new things, like a new dungeon, and the option of getting a super-powered boomerang. The Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Seasons, and Oracle of Ages. So why both at the number one, you may ask? Well, you simply can't have one without the other. These games were intertwined with themselves, and I honestly couldn't decide which one was better. One of the best things about these two games was that they succeeded in two major aspects of the Zelda games and split them apart. If you don't like puzzles and crave the fighting, you can play Oracle of Seasons for more intense battling. If you're not interested in excessive battling and love the puzzle-based games, then Oracle of Ages is surely up your alley. In Oracle of Seasons, Link travels across the land of Holodrum to retrieve 8 essences of the seasons so that he can defeat Onyx, the Dark Knight, Dark General, and save Din, the Goddess of Seasons. This is appealing more to the fans of the classic games. Dungeons are a lot quicker to go through than in Ages, but are much tougher in the enemy department. Some bosses will wipe the floor with you if you didn't come prepared. Speaking of boss fights, nearly every boss fight, and even most of the mini-bosses, were a reference to a boss fight from a previous installment. From Jerry the Wizard, to King Dodongo, to Farsad from Link's Awakening. In Oracle of Ages, however, the gameplay definitely appeals more to the modern fans. The enemies are less ruthless, but the puzzles can make the game well worth your brain power, especially those cube puzzles. There also seems to be bigger story elements that are more present than in Seasons, with memorable recurring characters such as Ralph, and a bigger emphasis on the situation at hand, with the castle infiltration being a great example. Well guys, that's been Top 10 Game Boy Color Games. I've been Fawful the Lego, see you next time.